For the United States as a whole, the century of peace gave the first opportunity to turn away from Europe, to exploit the vast undeveloped riches of one of Earth's richest continents, and to adjust our institutions and our social economic ways and values to the needs of the age and to those of our continent. For the American South, it meant the rise of the Cotton Kingdom, but no great repudiation of existing institutions and values. For the region in which the Republican Party was to have its hold, it meant a series of changes, revolutionary in degree, that left few institutions, relationships, or values untouched. Within little more than the lifespan of a single generation, a belt stretching from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania was remade in physical appearance, in its social arrangements, its economic interests, and the values its people held. Men's bodies were being pushed pell-mell into the modern world of finance industrial capitalism, while their minds were left behind to struggle with the problems of adjusting the old to the new. In that struggle, every existing institution, every old relationship and value was forced to answer as to fitness for service in the new day. Every new development was asked to measure its merits against old tacit assumptions. A strange new hospitality to ideas went with these demands, and men and women set about with feverish haste to make realities conform to ideals. This was particularly true where new wealth created by new methods fell into new hands, and thereby created new and strange relationships between those who toiled and those who accumulated. Work, whether among the Puritans of Massachusetts or the Quakers of Pennsylvania, had always had the dignity of a calling. God, wrote a Puritan divine, doth call every man and woman to serve him in some particular employment. The great governor of the world hath appointed every man his proper post and province, and let him be ever so active out of his sphere. He will be at a great loss if he do not mend his own vineyard and keep his own province. Wealth, in turn, was the product of hard work at one's calling, of thrift, moderation, sobriety, and foresight. It was a trust. It was to be gained and used, not for greater self-indulgence, but for the glory of God. If God show you a way in which you may lawfully get more than in another way, and you refuse this, wrote another, you cross one of the ends of your calling, and you refuse to be God's steward. Diligence, wrote William Penn, is a virtue and laudable among men. It is a discreet and understanding application of oneself to business, and avoids the extremes of idleness and drudgery. Frugality, he added, is a virtue too, the better way to be rich, for it has less toil and temptation. A penny saved is a penny got. Such were the traditional attitudes towards work and wealth in a region where men, as employers and employees, had long stood on equal ground and bargained freely and with respect for each other. They had thus been strangely prepared both to accept enthusiastically the new finance industrial capitalism as it came rushing forward, and to quarrel bitterly with it. There would be much confusion and angry strife, but men's tacit assumptions would be made clear and their convictions deepened. The addition of old world idealists, largely to New York, would only increase the difficulties. For our purposes, the first significant result of the coming of finance industrial capitalism to this region in the years between 1815 and 1844 was the rise of a new and powerful group of business leaders and the creation of a new and uniquely dependent body of workers. In the beginning, they developed with the textile industry. A decline in commerce made capital available and scattered cotton mills about wherever water power could be found. Overexpansion and depression soon weeded out the least efficient and left the textiles largely in the hands of those who had been able to secure the greatest capital and the most efficient management. Profits soared. Successful groups widened their efforts, brought up power sites, built machine shops, laid out and built whole factory towns, speculated in lands, projected canals and railroads, and found use for their surplus capital in banking and insurance. Enterprising merchants in Boston, New York City, and Philadelphia found equal opportunities for wealth in the revival and expansion of trade and in the decline of competition from the older centers. Families in both these fortunate groups widely intermarried. Their harsh old Calvinistic beliefs gave way to more rational and dignified ones, and their political needs found expression in the conservative doctrines of the Whig Party. A new aristocracy of growing wealth and power had come into being. But industry had done more than produce capitalists. The young folks who came down from the country to work in the mills soon learned that their move meant considerably more than just an escape from fields and kitchens. Long hours at varied tasks in the open air were one thing. The same hours in a poorly ventilated, lint-filled room spent at a single task was something else. They also learned that bitter competition between factories in periods of depression meant longer hours, more spindles to tend, and reduced wages. To protest or to strike brought lockouts and blacklists. The alternatives were to accept it or leave. By 1844, most New England girls had chosen the latter course, and French Canadian and Irish girls had taken their places. Workers in the great commercial centers fared little better. According to the Working Man's Advocate, they were despised and trampled upon by the drones and minions of fortune. The capitalists, complained the New York State Mechanic, have taken to bossing all the mechanical trades, while the practical mechanic has become a journeyman, subject to be discharged at every pretended miff of his purse-proud employer. A moneyed aristocracy, they said, was hanging over the worker, like a mighty avalanche threatening annihilation to every man who dared to question the capitalist's right to enslave and oppress the poor and unfortunate. Workers looked around them upon the princely palaces and gaudy equipages of the rich, who consumed the fruits of the poor man's labor without adding to the common stock a grain of wheat or a blade of grass. And when the right to organize was denied by the courts, workers solemnly proclaimed that the freedom of the North are now on a level with the slaves of the South, with no other privilege than laboring, that drones may fatten on your lifeblood. Industry had thus produced a situation in regard to wealth and labor repugnant to every assumption and value on which the existing social economic order traditionally rested. Here was wealth greater than ever known before, wealth gained not by men as producers, but as masters of capital, middlemen, investors, and speculators, wealth that held the living of the many in its hands, but which had largely lost the sense of stewardship. And here was work that lacked dignity, wages fixed without bargaining, regulation and control in place of the old freedom.